France, December 1944. Fog hung between the fir trees like torn gauze. The ground trembled with the slow rhythm of distant artillery. Inside the ruins of a collapsed farmhouse, we crouched in our M4 Sherman, 30 tons of frozen steel breathing slow through a cracked exhaust. The turret was turned completely backward, the barrel aimed into the mist behind us. I remember the silence before the sh*T. Frost on the scope. The smell of oil and metal. Charlie Donovan, our G*Ner, had his eye to the sight. His gloves were frozen to the steel. Our commander, Sergeant Cassidy, whispered, "Tell me you're not really gonna shoot backwards." Charlie didn't answer. He just adjusted the elevation dial one click to the left. Through the fog, a shadow moved, big, low, patient. A German Panther, its engine grumbling like thunder under snow. Charlie exhaled. A metallic click. Then the world tore open. The shell left the barrel, screaming into the whiteness. A flash. A roar that turned the fog to fire. When it cleared, the Panther was gone, just a twisted plume of smoke curling from where it had stood. One sh*T. One explosion. And one question that none of us could answer that day. Why was our G*N facing the wrong way, and why had it worked? The Vosges Mountains, eastern France. Late 1944. We were the 7th Armored Division on paper, but out here the paper went soft in the fog and tore at the first touch of rain. The ridgelines were timbered with fir, the valleys slicked with clay that swallowed tracks and promises. Radios whispered, then died. Engines coughed like old men. The war narrowed to what you could see through glass the size of a postcard. The manuals were clear. Engage the enemy head-on. Speed, armor, aggression. Put your 75 into their glacis, keep moving, turn with them, never give them your flank. I had underlined those lines at Fort Knox, pencil hard enough to score the paper. Instructors love that cadence, doctrine as drumbeat. You start to believe a sentence can turn a shell. Reality was mud, fog, and burning steel. Every morning smelled like wet canvas and hot gearbox. Our M4 ran on a Continental R975 radial that shook the hull at idle and smoothed out at 2,100 revolutions per minute, sweet spot for the governor, loud enough to drown a prayer. The heater never worked. Frost filmed the periscope. I learned to scrape it with the curve of a thumbnail without taking my eye from the reticle. The enemy carried numbers we respected, Panthers with the 7.5 cm KWK 42L/70, Tigers with the 8.8 that sounded like a door slamming in God's house. Their armor stacked in cruel angles, 80 mm at 55 degrees on a Panther's nose, our 75 could glance like a pebble off slate. At 800 yards they could punch through us, at 800 yards our rounds could die on their skin. Paper said, advance. The field said, burn. Our crew, Cassidy up top with the phones, Vitelli on the sticks, Harlan on the rack, me behind the M70G sight, lived inside 30 tons that felt smaller every week. I slept with my right shoulder sore where the shoulder rest bit, and woke with the reticle still floating in my head, a circle, a post, numbers like shy ghosts in the fog. I measured days in mills. Headquarters wanted momentum. The maps were ribboned in red pencil arrows so long they curled off the edges. Every briefing began with confidence and ended with supply. Fuel convoys lagged behind, ammo lorries stuck in ditches. When the Panthers slid out of the woods you felt the ledger settle. They held the armor, we held the arithmetic. We were told our advantages were speed and numbers. Speed is a rumor in knee-deep clay, numbers thin quickly when one Panther K*LLS 2 Shermans before you can range in. We learned angles like farmers learn weather. At 400 yards, if you were blessed with flank, aim low behind the road wheel. At 600, walk the he to the driver's visor and pray for spall. If you have none of that, breathe, keep the hull moving, and make the next mistake take longer to find you. Fog turned the Vosges into a study in patience. Sound arrived before shape, shape arrived before color. By the time color showed, it could be too late. We listened for Maybach notes, thicker, flatter than our radial, and the distinct pause before a German crew shifted ranges. You could feel their confidence in the way they didn't hurry. In that season I began carrying a pocket notebook under my wool. Not the issued one, mine had blue carpenter's lines and my mother's initials on the first page. I logged wind by smoke from a knocked-out deuce and a half, temperature by the way breath froze on the mantlet, range by fence posts. I wrote what training never said: when you turn the turret away from them, your whole silhouette shrinks, the G*N stays the G*N, but the target becomes half a rumor. Cassidy called me slow trigger. He didn't mean timid. He meant I counted wine before I breathed. Fort Knox had written it in my file, the war underlined it. Out here, a slow trigger kept you from firing the wrong truth. Orders moved slower than Panthers. Engage head-on assumed a road wide enough for ideas. Aggression assumed armor that could take a first mistake. In the Vosges, the first mistake became a memorial beside a ditch. We started to edit the doctrine in pencil at the edges. Harlan double-stacked smoke on the ready rack though the table said 2 only. Vitelli practiced reverse driving by compass needle, hatch down, because sometimes forward was death and backward was air. There is a rule the manual never prints: when you cannot change your armor, change your angle. I heard my mother's voice: every problem has an angle. Find it, and you'll fix it. I was a farm boy with a slide rule lodged somewhere behind the eyes, and I carried her sentence like a spare part. The system wanted units, not crews, procedures, not instincts. But machines don't salute. They either run or fail, and in between is the thin place where a man's choice lives. The Battalion S3 saw objectives, phase lines, timings. I saw a hedgerow that hit a road cut 2 feet deeper on the left, enough to bury our nose and drop our profile while the turret looked the other way. The difference between a plan and a solution was 3 inches of mud. By late December, we had seen enough Shermans die by the book to know the book was written for a cleaner war. Panthers fired from shadow, pulled back, shifted 20 yards, and let you shoot at the echo. They expected us to charge the sound. Some days we did, and the wrecks smoked by noon. So the context is simple, though we made it complicated with maps and phrases. We were small against a larger problem. Our doctrine was bright and our weather dark. The system said, face them. The mountain said, survive. And I, Charlie Donovan, G*Ner, ordinary, patient, found myself standing between those voices with a frozen scope, a stubborn crew, and one unprinted option that kept growing louder in the fog. Before the war, I was a man of engines and soil. Iowa, 1938, flat land that taught you patience. You could watch a storm arrive 2 counties away and still have time to finish your work before the first drop hit. My father ran a modest farm outside Boone, corn, soy, and a few cattle that never stopped chewing even when the snow came. I kept the tractors alive, international harvesters mostly, one John Deere Model B that coughed like an old dog until you tuned the magneto just right. Machines made sense to me. They didn't argue, they didn't panic, and when they broke, they told you why. I was 21 when the radio carried news from Poland. We listened in the kitchen, my mother drying dishes, my father quiet, staring at nothing. Europe seemed like another planet then. Our world was mud, harvest schedules, and the smell of diesel on skin. But the idea of men marching across maps stuck with me. My mother said, it's always the engineers who clean up after the soldiers. She was a math teacher, precise and kind. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse and kept her chalks lined up by length. She'd tell me, every problem has an angle. Find it, and you'll fix it. Those words stayed longer than anything written in scripture. When an axle snapped, I found the angle. When the combine belt tore, I found it again. I learned to see stress lines in metal the way others read weather. A crack begins quiet, it widens by logic, not chance. That calm logic, some called it detachment, became habit. I didn't join the army for glory. I joined because machines were leaving the fields for factories, and war, everyone said, was full of machines. The recruiter in Des Moines asked if I could read blueprints. I said I could draw them. 2 weeks later I was on a train to Fort Knox, Kentucky, clutching a duffel and a pocket notebook filled with gear ratios I'd copied from farm manuals. Fort Knox smelled of oil and authority. The instructors talked faster than I liked, but the engines under the hood spoke my language. Continental radials, Ford GAA V8S, engines built to run at the edge of logic. They made us strip them blindfolded, then assemble them by touch. Most men cursed. I counted bolts like prayers. They called me Iowa, because accents travel slower than men. In G*Nary school I wasn't quick. My first instructor, Lieutenant Marsh, said, "Donovan, you move like winter." I thought he was insulting me. Then he added, "But winter always arrives." My range scores climbed. I learned wind estimation from the way flags bent, not how they flapped. I could tell when the crosswind changed a hair by the feel of exhaust on my cheek. The Army loves numbers. Everything becomes a score. Accuracy, speed, maintenance hours. They wrote in my file, slow trigger. Never misses. Counts wind before he breathes. That was supposed to sound odd. To me, it sounded correct. A trigger is just another lever, pull it without data, and you might as well pray to the recoil spring. On Sundays we were allowed an hour off. Some men smoked, others drank. I'd find my way to the maintenance shed and stare at the disassembled 75mm G*N. The breech block, when cleaned, reflected light like river ice. I traced the rifling with a gloved finger, wondering about the geometry of death, how spin stabilized trajectory, how pressure turned still air into a corridor of certainty. I didn't hate it, but I respected its mathematics. War came closer each month. By 42 we were shipping out in convoys that stretched beyond sight. I remember the smell of the Atlantic, diesel, rust, and fear masked by bravado. The ocean has no patience for rules either. We arrived in England, grey and damp, then crossed into France after Normandy. The beaches still smelled of cordite when we rolled off the landing craft. I kept thinking of the barns back home, how they echoed when empty. The villages here echoed the same way, only the echoes were in German. Between operations I wrote letters that said little. I'm fine, the weather's bad, engines running well. I never told my parents about the burning tanks we passed, or the men frozen beside them. You can't translate that into home language. I sent pressed leaves instead, pieces of Europe that looked harmless. By September 1944, I'd seen enough to understand efficiency. Machines failed by pattern, men by assumption. The ones who followed the manual too closely usually died in sequence, first the driver who trusted the road, then the commander who trusted the map. I began to question the sacred order of procedure. Not rebellion, calculation. The irony was that my calm made superiors trust me. Cassidy, our sergeant, said, "If you ever start talking fast, I'll know we're finished." He was from Boston, built of nerves and caffeine, but he valued steadiness. So he put me on the G*N. The G*N fit. The 75mm M3 had recoil I could predict, a range table I memorized like scripture. The trigger's pull weight, 5.5 pounds, was something you could feel in your sleep. Each time it kicked, the world reorganized into math, distance, velocity, deflection. I wasn't K*ling, I was solving. The ethics came later, at night, when the barrel cooled and the smell lingered. When I think of before, I remember silence, the kind after a machine stops and the world keeps spinning. I lived in that silence. I thought precision could save me, that logic was armor. But the war proved otherwise. Out here, precision became something else, survival by deviation. Looking back, the farm boy in me never left. I still counted wind, still waited for angles. Only now, the field was metal, the harvest black smoke. And when the day came that I turned the turret backward and aimed the G*N the wrong way, I didn't feel brave or reckless. I felt the same calm as when I'd tightened a loose bolt on my father's tractor. The machine had a problem, I had found its angle. That was all. By September 1944, the rhythm of death had become predictable. You could mark it like the ticking of a clock. A new unit arrived, bright-eyed, their Shermans clean and painted with division numbers still sharp. Within a week, the paint dulled. Within 2, half of them burned black in the fields. The ones that survived learned what no manual admitted: you did not fight a Panther face-on and live to quote procedure. I kept a ledger in my pocket notebook. Not of K*LLS, not of miles, of patterns. Each time a Sherman went down, I asked why. I measured angles, counted seconds from first contact to silence. The truth repeated itself: those who followed doctrine died faster. The orders said advance directly, close range, exploit mobility. But mobility meant nothing in mud that seized treads like glue and hills that broke transmissions. The battlefield was a maze of half-ruined stone villages and pine thickets too tight for flanking. Head-on meant suicide. One morning, near St. Di, I watched 3 Shermans crest a hill in textbook formation. Their turrets were forward, barrels elevated just so. A Panther waited in the orchard below. It fired once, first tank gone. Repositioned 10 yards. Fired again, second tank flamed, turret spinning like a coin. The third tried to withdraw, its left tread sheared off under the weight of panic. We pulled the crew out hours later. All of them charred, eyes open as if still following orders. That night, I drew diagrams in my notebook by candlelight. I noticed something the Army never mentioned: when a Sherman faced away, hull reversed, its silhouette from the front was nearly half the visible area. The sloped rear plate reflected light differently. To the German G*Ner scanning through fog, it blended with the terrain. I began to wonder, if we turned our turrets backward, could we fool range estimation? The Panther's G*Ners calculated distance by apparent size. Have that, and you could buy the seconds you needed to strike first. It sounded insane, even to me. Tanks were built to look forward, fight forward. Every design assumed aggression as virtue. But engineering doesn't care for pride. Angles are angles. If the smaller target lives longer, the smaller target is better. I mentioned it once, half as a joke, during maintenance. My loader, Harlan, laughed through a mouthful of cold rations. Backward warfare, huh? You've been out in the sun too long. Even Cassidy, leaning against the glacis, shook his head. Forget it, Charlie. This ain't Iowa. This is war. They were right by the book. But something inside me, a mechanic's instinct, refused to quit the math. I kept seeing those halves of silhouettes, those dying men who had done everything right. Maybe doing right was the problem. That night, under the low drone of distant artillery, I wrote a single word in the margin beside my range tables: try. Weeks passed. The idea lingered like a secret illness. Each time we entered position, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, imagining the G*N swung backward, barrel resting above the engine deck. I pictured the enemy confused, searching for a hull that seemed too small, a turret that wasn't where it should be. The theory tempted me with its wrongness. Doctrine said never present your rear armor to the enemy. I knew the numbers: rear plate, 38 mm at 10 degrees, nearly paper against a 75 mm shell. But doctrine ignored deception. If they couldn't range you, maybe they couldn't hit you at all. The trick wasn't to survive the hit, it was to deny the aim. I began running tests during downtime. Nothing official. Just small things. When we parked for the night, I rotated the turret backward and measured how far the barrel's shadow stretched in the morning light. I stood 50 yards out and compared shapes through binoculars. The result was plain. From distance, the tank looked wrong, smaller, almost harmless. From an angle, it could vanish against a ridge where a forward-facing Sherman would glint like bait. Still, I said nothing. You don't change a war with sketches. But I kept refining the thought. If we ever faced ambush on a narrow road, the kind with no room to turn, maybe reversal was salvation. Drive backward, turret reversed, fire into the fog. The tank could retreat while shooting, advance in reverse. The phrase sounded absurd until I realized that's what survival often is, absurd until proven correct. In late October, our battalion engaged near Bruyères. The fog was so thick you could taste iron in it. We lost 2 tanks before even spotting the muzzle flashes. One shell punched through the lead Sherman and detonated its ammo rack, a sound like the sky cracking open. We fired blind and withdrew uphill, engines screaming. The Panthers didn't follow, they didn't need to. They had already written the ending. That night, while the others drank bitter coffee and cursed command, I sat inside the turret and turned the G*N backward. Just to feel it. The balance shifted, subtle but real, the recoil guard against my knees, the breech light like a coiled muscle ready to move. Through the periscope, I saw the camp behind us, flickering fires, men shivering. The sight felt foreign, reversed, yet somehow truer. The world looked unfamiliar enough to offer options. I closed the hatch and whispered to no one, one day, I'll try it. That was the first crack in the armor, not steel, but faith. Faith in manuals, in men who wrote them from desks far from mud. I wasn't rebelling. I was listening to the only teacher that mattered out here, failure. By the end of November, I had filled 5 pages with calculations, angles, recoil arcs, center of gravity when the turret reversed. It was mechanical poetry, ugly but honest. I still didn't know when I'd use it. Only that someday, when the world forced my hand, would find the angle. And maybe, just maybe, the wrong way would be the only one left. November 1944 came like a fever that wouldn't break. The rain never stopped. It hammered the Vosges valleys until the rivers rose over their banks and the roads turned to clay. Our tanks sank up to the bogies and groaned with each mile. The air itself felt mechanical, thick, grinding, without mercy. Exhaust curled low under the clouds, refusing to rise. We moved because the map said move. We fought because the silence said we had to. On the morning of the 12th, near a village called Remelsham, just a handful of stone houses pinned between 2 hills, we were ordered to recon the main road ahead of the infantry. Standard procedure, 1 platoon forward, rest in reserve. We were second in column. 2 Shermans ahead, 3 behind. The rain had turned the road into a brown mirror. Each treadprint filled instantly with water. Visibility under 100 yards. Fog swallowed sound. Cassidy read the order aloud in that clipped Boston tone that tried to sound confident. Advance to waypoint Baker 4, hold, await confirmation. Do not pursue contact. He folded the map on his knee. You hear that, Charlie? No heroics. I answered, copy, but my hands were already cold on the elevation wheel. Every nerve in me was whispering that something ahead was wrong. At 0930 hours, the lead tank's radio crackled once, half a word, and then cut off. A second later came the explosion. The blast rolled through the valley like thunder off stone. We stopped instinctively. The column bunched, engines idling, exhaust pluming in gray knots. I switched to external optics. Through the fog, I saw flame. The lead Sherman had vanished behind a wall of smoke, the second was sliding into the ditch, its left track sheared clean. Ambush. Harlan shouted. Cassidy grabbed the phone, barked to the rear tanks for covering fire, but the frequency was dead air, just static and the slow pulse of interference. We were alone. Fall back, Cassidy ordered. Standard procedure, reverse to previous position. Standard procedure. I could feel the words scraping in my skull. The road behind us curved down into a ravine. Wet clay, no traction, and a drop steep enough to flip us if the tread slipped. Behind the ravine, trees so dense you couldn't turn the hull without shearing the antenna. In theory, we were to withdraw, reform, and counterattack. In reality, that meant sliding into a ditch and dying like the others. I looked at the map spread on Cassidy's lap. The ink had run from the rain, blue rivers bleeding into brown paper. The road ahead narrowed, flanked by woods on both sides. Perfect for panthers, they'd sit at 45 degrees to the road, invisible, waiting for silhouettes. I could almost see them through the mist, patient hunters behind barrels twice our length. Driver, neutral. Hold here, Cassidy said. Vitelli hesitated. Sir, they've got the front sighted. We're fish in a bucket. Cassidy's jaw tightened. We don't move until we have orders. No orders were coming. Command was 3 miles back and cut off by flooded roads. The only messages we'd received all week were fragments: hold position, regroup at dawn, maintain contact. Dawn had come and gone. Through the G** sight, I could see the flicker of muzzle flash in the trees, low, deliberate. German discipline. A second flash, farther left. The ambush wasn't single point. It was a crossfire. I spoke quietly. They've got triangulation. 2, maybe 3 panthers. Cassidy leaned over the periscope, squinting. We can't confirm that. I can, I said. Another blast. Shrapnel hissed against our hull. The air inside filled with dust shaken loose from the seams. Cassidy gritted his teeth. We can't stay here. We'll pull back 50 yards, use the bend for cover. Vitelli revved the engine. The tread spun, slipped, then caught. The tank lurched backward, but the slope was unforgiving. The rear idler hit mud and slid sideways toward the ravine. The entire hull tilted. For a second, gravity shifted underfoot. I saw the right track lift half an inch from the ground, a whisper from flipping. Stop! I shouted. Neutral. Vitelli froze. The tank settled, groaning. Water poured from the slope into the ravine below. One more backward meter and we'd have been upside down. Cassidy cursed under his breath. Now what? I wiped condensation from the sight. The fog ahead pulsed with flashes, brief, precise. The Panthers were firing by interval, not by sight, laying blind suppression to flush us. They knew the Americans would retreat. They were aiming for where we should be by the book. I said, if we follow procedure, we die in the next paragraph. Cassidy turned toward me, eyes narrowed. What did you say? They're not shooting at us, I explained. They're shooting at the manual. Every Sherman that backs down that road will die the same way. He stared, rain dripping from his helmet. So what's your solution, Iowa? I hesitated. The idea that had been living in my notebook for weeks rose like a ghost. Turn the tank around. Face the wrong way. Fire first, retreat forward. But to say it aloud meant owning it. To propose it meant challenging everything that kept an army from chaos. I met his eyes. There's only one way out that isn't written. He frowned. You planning to rewrite the manual under fire? The next shell landed closer, showering us with dirt. Harlan swore. Vitelli muttered a prayer in Italian. I looked back through the sight, past the fog, past the burning wrecks of the lead tanks, and saw what every engineer knows eventually: design fails where imagination stops. My voice came out steady. If we do what they expect, we're finished. But if we look like a mistake, just once, they might miss. Cassidy studied me for a heartbeat too long. Outside, the forest thundered again. That was the moment, the thin line between obedience and extinction. The decision hadn't formed yet, but the geometry had. The angles were already there, waiting to be acknowledged. All that remained was the choice to break the line drawn for us. And somewhere behind the static, I swear I could hear my mother's voice again, "Find the angle." I exhaled, fogging the sight. "We're not backing up," I said quietly. "We're going to turn the tank around." Cassidy blinked. "What?" I repeated it, louder this time. "Turn the tank around." No one spoke after that. Just the rain, and the slow mechanical heart of the engine waiting for an impossible command. Cassidy stared at me as if I'd spoken in another language. The rain drummed against the armor, pooling on the engine deck, running down in rivulets that hissed against the exhaust. The air inside the Sherman was thick with oil, sweat, and the faint electrical tang of fear. "Turn the tank around," he said finally. "You've lost your goddamn mind." "Maybe," I replied, steady. "But not my rangefinder." The driver, Vitelli, kept his hands frozen on the sticks. "You're asking me to show our rear to a Panther G*N? I'm asking you to reverse into the mud and keep the hull low," I said. "Turret stays on target. They're sighted on where we were, front profile, high silhouette. We change that, they lose their aim." Cassidy looked from me to the periscope, then back again. His jaw worked, trying to find an order that didn't exist. "You're telling me we face backward into a firing line." "I'm telling you we make them guess," I said. "Panther optics are Zeiss TZFs, perfect, but precise. They expect patterns. Give them something that doesn't fit, and for a second they'll hesitate. 1 second's enough." Harlan the loader muttered, "Christ, this is suicide." "Then we'll do it quietly," I said. No one moved. Outside, another shell tore through the fog, detonating somewhere to our right. The concussion slammed against the hull. Dust fell from the seams, the lamp flickered. Cassidy wiped grime from his cheek. "All right," he said finally, voice low. "Driver, half turn, easy, no noise." Vitelli exhaled like a man stepping off a cliff. He released the clutch, feathered the throttle, and the Sherman began to pivot, treads grinding wet clay. The hull moaned as weight shifted. The turret stayed forward, our barrel now pointing toward the enemy while our engine faced them too. Everything about it felt wrong. It was like looking through a mirror that could K*LLU. "Keep the nose down," I said. "Angle 8 degrees. Lower profile." The driver eased us back until the rear idler wheels lodged behind a stump. The tank settled. Mud climbed halfway up the hull, sealing us in a dark cradle. "Stop." We froze there, engine rumbling at idle, exhaust choking the air behind us. The world outside was a blur of gray. Through the periscope, I could see faint movement between trees, shadows sliding in pairs, deliberate, searching. The Germans were shifting, confident we'd retreated. They were hunting by assumption. I adjusted the elevation screw, compensating for the slope. My hands were steady now. The plan had already turned from madness to math. Cassidy leaned over my shoulder. "What's the range?" 700. Give or take 10. Shell? Armor piercing. M61. Harlan slid the round into the breech. The metal clanged softly, int asterisk made as a heartbeat. I checked the sight, aligned crosshair and post until they kissed the fog. "First the wind," I murmured. "Then the distance. Then the trigger." The words were habit, not poetry. I adjusted one last time. The reticle framed a faint shape, broad, low, with a turret longer than ours. The Panther. Its hull turned slightly, G*N scanning the ridge where we should have been. I could almost feel the geometry of it, the right flank exposed, distance fixed, steel meeting steel at an angle I had rehearsed and thought for weeks. "Firing," I said. Cassidy didn't answer. I pulled the trigger. The 75mm roared. The recoil slammed through my shoulder, a hydraulic punch that rattled the entire hull. The flash blinded the periscope. For half a second there was nothing but light. Then the sound returned, metal screaming, echo bouncing off trees. Through the clearing smoke I saw the Panther lurch, its turret frozen mid-turn. Fire burst from beneath its armor plates like breath from a furnace. A second later, the explosion followed, deep, guttural, final. The turret lifted clean off, thrown sideways by the blast of its own ammunition. No one spoke. The forest had turned into a cathedral of silence. Then, movement again, another tank behind the first, smaller silhouette, likely a Panzer IV edging forward to cover its lead. "Second target," I said. Harlan was already loading. Up. I adjusted 1 mil lower. The reticle cut the fog clean. Fire. The next *T cracked the air apart. The shell disappeared into gray, then a bloom of orange followed. The Panzer halted, caught mid-maneuver. Its engine compartment erupted, smoke churning thick and black. Cassidy blinked at the sight, disbelief flickering across his face. "You just led 2 tanks, facing backward?" I kept my eye on the sight. Guess the wrong way was the right one. Another shell whistled overhead, missing wide. They were shooting blind now, guessing at ghosts. I let the G*N cool, felt the metal tremble under my palm. "Driver, hold," I ordered. "Don't give them movement. Let the smoke speak for us." We waited, surrounded by fog that smelled of cordite and rain. My pulse slowed to the same rhythm as the engine idle, steady, exact. Cassidy finally spoke. "You realize if command hears about this, they'll think we lost our heads." "Maybe," I said. "But we kept them." He laughed once, quietly. "You're still out of your mind." "Then let's stay crazy until dawn," I replied. Outside, the forest shifted again, German voices calling through the mist, unsure, broken by static bursts from their own radios. They thought we were somewhere else. They thought logic had limits. Inside our steel box, every gauge hummed within range. Pressure good. Temperature holding. The impossible had worked once. That meant it could work again. I leaned back from the sight, wiped condensation from my gloves, and looked at Cassidy. "Next time," I said, "let's start wrong." He nodded, faint smile beneath the grime. "You lead the way, Iowa." So we waited in the fog, a tank turned backward against the order of the world, engine facing death, G*N pointed through it, and for the first time since France, I believed we might live. Out of the fog came movement again, slow, deliberate, like thought made visible. Shadows where trees should have been, lines where mist bent unnaturally. I pressed my eye to the sight. First a Panzer IV, narrow hull, turret turned toward the wreck of its burning lead. Then, behind it, the outline of another Panther, larger, flatter, its G*N barrel cutting through smoke like a compass needle searching for north. "2 more," I said. Cassidy crouched over the radio, tapping the handset though he knew it was dead. "We still have no comms. No friendlies in range." "Good," I answered. "Less to explain later." Harlan already had the next round ready, fingers trembling from the cold. The air inside the tank was thick with propellant. Every breath carried the bite of smoke and oil. The periscope glass fogged again, I wiped it clean with my sleeve. The German tanks moved with caution now, predators sniffing confusion. They didn't know how many of us there were. Our backward hull, half buried in mud, must have looked like a wreck or an abandoned position. They crept closer, scanning. "Hold until they clear the smoke," I whispered. "We hit the one on the right first." "The Panther." Cassidy leaned over me. "Range?" 500. Maybe 480. Close enough for physics to be kind. The Panther's turret began to swing, searching. I waited for the moment it exposed its flank. A breath. Another. The wind shifted, the flame from the first wreck bent eastward. "Now," I said. The 75mm roared again. The recoil drove the turret ring back against its stops, the whole tank lurching. Through the haze I saw the hit, dead center on the lower hull. A burst of white light, then the muffled concussion of internal detonation. The Panther buckled, its right tread folding inward. It stopped moving altogether, engine coughing smoke like a dying beast. "Hit confirmed," Harlan said flatly. "Target 2, I replied. The Panzer IV tried to pivot away, tracks biting mud, its turret swinging toward the flicker of our muzzle flash. But the road was too narrow, the trees too close. It hesitated, a heartbeat of indecision. "Up!" Harlan called, slamming the next shell into the breech. I fired before he could finish the word. The round struck low, beneath the turret ring. The explosion was brief, efficient, almost neat. The Panzer's hatch blew open, a single figure climbed halfway out, burning, then collapsed across the armor. The firelight painted the fog orange and gold, colors no artist would ever want to see again. "Cease," I said quietly. For a moment, there was nothing, no movement, no counterfire. Just rain sizzling on hot metal and the slow pop of cooling steel. Cassidy exhaled, long and unsteady. "That's 4, Iowa. 4 tanks gone." 3, I corrected. "One might still be breathing." He gave a dry laugh. "You and your damn numbers. Numbers keep us alive." He nodded, eyes still wide. "I'll take arithmetic over miracles. But miracles have a habit of repeating when logic runs out." Another shape moved in the far left of my field, an armored half-track, infantry dismounting from its rear bed, rifles glinting wet in the faint light. German grenadiers. They were moving toward the wrecks, cautious, we*P*NS raised. "They're probing," I said. "What do we do?" "Remind them which way the barrels pointed." I switched to the coaxial .30 caliber, fed the belt, and squeezed the trigger. The chatter filled the turret, brass shells raining down onto the floor plates. Sparks flared as rounds ricocheted off the half-track's nose. The infantry scattered, vanishing into the fog. Silence returned. Real silence, the kind that only exists when fear runs out of sounds to make. Harlan leaned against the ammo rack, breathing hard. His gloves were burned through at the fingers. "We out?" 2 armor-piercing left, I said. Then smoke. Cassidy looked at me, something between awe and disbelief in his eyes. "I can't believe it worked." "It wasn't supposed to," I said. Outside, the fire from the destroyed tanks painted the fog from within, orange hearts beating in gray lungs. The heat began to thaw the frost on our hull, turning ice into rivulets. The rain softened, more mist than water now. The air reeked of antifreeze and cordite. "Driver," I said, "throttle steady. No lights. We hold here." Vitelli's voice came soft through the intercom. "You think they'll come again?" "They'll think we're ghosts," I replied. "Let's not prove them wrong." We waited another 10 minutes, G*NS ready, but no shapes emerged. German discipline had turned to uncertainty. Somewhere beyond that fog, their radio chatter would be wild, commanders arguing over where the SH*TS came from, how many Shermans were in the trees. None of them would guess that the answer was 1. When we finally eased forward, it was dawn. The fog had thinned, replaced by steam rising from the wrecks. We passed the burning Panthers, their turrets twisted off, black smoke trailing into the pale sky. The ground was cratered, littered with fragments of track links and spent shell casings. Cassidy stood half out of the cupola, scanning. "You know what they'll call this?" he said. "What?" "Luck." I shrugged. "Luck's just math that people don't want to solve." He smiled at that, weary and hollow. "You really believe that?" I looked back at the ruined road, the smoke folding into the clouds. "I believe it worked." We rejoined what was left of our column miles down the valley. The other crews stared when they saw us, turret reversed, mud caked to the engine deck, exhaust blackened. One man pointed and muttered something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was admiration. Maybe disbelief. Cassidy climbed down first. He didn't speak to anyone. Just walked a few steps into the drizzle, helmet under his arm. Then he turned back and looked at me. "You broke every rule we have," he said. "I know. And you saved our lives." "I know that too." He hesitated, then grinned, small and tired. "Wrong way, right result." The phrase stuck in the air, faint as smoke, before the wind took it. Behind us, the forest still smoldered, and the fog kept its secrets. Back at the bivouac, nobody believed us. A tank with its turret spun backward sounded like drink tent folklore or the kind of bravado men invent to survive the afternoon. The quartermaster asked where we'd found the extra smoke shells we'd allegedly used. We hadn't. The maintenance sergeant wanted to see our mantlet for proof of unusual recoil stress. He ran a greasy thumb over the trunnions and grunted when he found nothing more than honest wear. Cassidy wrote the after-action report at a folding table that wobbled on frozen mud. He kept his language spare: contact, ambush, counterfire, 4 enemy tanks destroyed, 1 half-track scattered, no friendly losses. He didn't include the geometry. He didn't write, "We turned the tank the wrong way and *T like cowards facing home." He just handed it in and said, "They'll throw it out if we make it sound clever." They did throw parts of it out. Battalion marked the K*LLS as probable, pending reconnaissance. A captain with a pencil mustache asked how we maintained forward observation while reversing under combat conditions. I told him observation isn't directional, it's a habit. He frowned as if I'd quoted scripture in the motor pool. That evening, rain ticked on shelter halves and a smell of coffee drifted from a field kitchen that had somehow survived the roads. I sat on our glacis with my notebook open to smudged tables. Vitelli passed me a tin cup, steam so thin it seemed ashamed to rise. Harlan wrapped his blistered fingers and watched the dark line of trees as if it were a chalkboard that might explain itself. Word travels faster than orders. By nightfall, 2 mechanics from another company arrived with flashlights and quiet questions. "You boys really *T backward?" one asked, half laughing to keep his courage. I said we *T first. The direction just helped. He peered at our turret ring, seeking secrets inside plain metal. Near midnight, a jeep returned from the valley with photographs the recon boys had risked their lungs to take. Wet prints, silver still pooling at the edges. There they were, 2 Panthers black as winter stoves, one with its turret blown clear and lying like a beheaded crown 10 yards away. The entry holes were tidy in the violence, low and a shade left of center. A corporal held the pictures under a lantern and whistled through his teeth, soft as respect. By morning someone had chalked WRONG, WAY on our starboard fender. The letters staggered upslope like a drunk learning to write. Harlan started to wipe them off. Cassidy stopped him. "Leave it," he said. "If it keeps us alive, it can call us names." The report came back stamped, engagement successful, contributing factors undetermined. That was the Army's way of admitting a thing without marrying it. We were issued no citation, only fresh rations and a reminder to conduct bore inspections after irregular firing arcs. The phrase made me smile, irregular arcs, as if courage had geometry. In the maintenance tent, the chief inspected our recoil cylinders and asked why the rear deck was packed with clay. Vitelli told him we'd nested. The chief stared, then laughed once, against regulation. He signed the log and slid it back. "Do it again quietly," he said, and pretended to adjust his glasses. The infantry came by with looks that were not quite friendly and not quite awe. One of them tapped our hull with a knuckle and said, "You boys turn tail and hit a Panther square." "That true?" I said we turned brain and hit what we could see. He nodded like a man filing away a trick card. In the Chow line, I heard our story told back to us from 3 tents away, 12 enemy tanks, a night ambush, 2 Shermans, then 4, then a platoon. Legends multiply when details offend belief. I didn't correct anyone. Accuracy lived in my notebook, rumor did the work of keeping men warm. Cassidy brought me coffee in a dented mug and set it on the breech like an offering. "It won't make the papers," he said. "It doesn't have to," I answered. It worked. He studied me a moment, measuring whether calm was just shock in better clothes. "You going to write it down the way it happened?" "I already did." I tapped the notebook. Wind, range, elevation, angle of hull. The rest is weather. We spent the afternoon pulling the mantlet and cleaning the recoil rails, a ritual that felt like confession. Each bolt loosened with the same small surrender. Each spring returned to tension like a decision reset. I ran a cloth through the bore until it came out gray instead of black. Metal is honest when you give it time. Before dusk, a major from Division Intelligence arrived in a mud-freckled command car. He didn't introduce himself to the crew, just to our tank. He circled it, hands behind his back, as if inspecting a monument to a heresy he was already planning to forget. "Sergeant Cassidy," he said finally, "in future engagements, maintain doctrinal posture. The enemy adapts quickly to gimmicks." Cassidy's jaw worked once. "Yes, sir." The major glanced at me. G***ner, your range estimations were creative. "Numbers, sir," I said. "They were just numbers." He looked away as if the word offended him and left with the photographs rolled into a tube he wouldn't want seen on his desk. After dark, the nickname migrated. Wrong Way leaped from fender to turret in thicker chalk. Someone added Sherman beneath. The letters looked less like mockery now and more like a prayer you write where the saints might see it. Vitelli traced the W with a fingertip. "Feels like we stole something," he said. "We did," I told him. "We stole seconds." The mechanics began to ask specifics. "What elevation for 500 through mist? How far did you bury the idlers? Did you use first or second when you nested?" I answered each question with the precision my mother taught me. Every problem has an angle. Find it, and you'll fix it. The angles here were not noble, they were survivable. 2 days later, a courier dropped a mimeographed note from brigade: "Consider asymmetric turret positioning when terrain denies standard hull-down options." No author, no credit, just a sentence loosened from a mouth that wouldn't admit it had spoken. Cassidy read it twice, then folded it into his pocket as if it might warm him. I didn't feel pride. Pride is loud and we were living quiet. I felt something closer to relief, the kind that follows when a stripped bolt finally turns. You don't cheer, you wipe your hands and move to the next problem. That night, as sleet rattled the canvas, I lay with my back against the turret wall, feeling the faint heat the G***N still gave off. My gloves were stiff with cordite. The chalk letters outside were dissolving under weather, white streaks running down olive drab like tears no one had time for. I thought of the Panthers in the road, dark shapes going cold. I thought of the men inside them, G***ner, loader, driver, mirrors of us, living by their doctrine until the world asked for something else. The battlefield does not love cleverness. It tolerates it when it works, and erases it when it doesn't. We had not changed the war. We had changed a corner of a road in France, in fog, for an hour that might have ended us. That was enough. In the ledger I kept for truths that refused to be loud, I wrote one line: facing wrong saved 4 lives. Then I closed the book, because the next day was waiting, and rules do not stay broken on their own. By spring of 1945, the war had thinned. What had once been an ocean of thunder was now a landscape of echoes. German armor retreated east, hollowed by fuel shortages and disbelief. The snow melted into mud, the mud into rivers, and the rivers carried away the pieces that nobody came to count. We were still there, moving, mending, cleaning barrels that had forgotten rest. The 7th Armored Division rolled through towns that no longer had names, only coordinates. Our Sherman still bore the ghost of chalk on its flank, the letters faint but stubborn: wrong way Sherman. Paint wore off faster than legend. Mechanics repainted the star, but they never touched the letters. Some said it was for luck. Others said it was a warning: never argue with results. Cassidy and I didn't talk about that day near Remmelsham anymore. We didn't need to. It existed in the small rituals: how he glanced at me before every order, how Vitelli reversed instinctively into cover instead of forward. Even Harlan, who had once laughed at the idea of backward warfare, now kept a length of rope tied to the turret handhold, a marker for perfect 180 rotation. Small superstitions built from one heresy that had worked. The brass began using new language in their reports, phrases like asymmetric turret positioning and reverse hull engagement under adverse terrain. Those words spread quietly through the division, passed along with hand gestures and half-smiles. No one ever attached a name to the idea. To do so would make it accountable, and accountability was heavier than armor. I read one of those reports in March, printed on onionskin paper, signed by a colonel who had never been within 10 miles of our ridge that day. He wrote, "The tactic presents potential for reduced exposure under conditions of low visibility. Recommended for experimental doctrine review." There it was, the official tone of theft, sterile and exact. But I didn't mind. Innovations never survive with names attached. They belong to whoever repeats them successfully. In late March, near the Rhine, we crossed a pontoon bridge built from steel sections that groaned with every tank. The water below was black, the reflection of a war's underside. I stood in the turret, watching our wake spread like fingerprints across the surface. We had come far from Iowa, so far that the concept of home felt like a memory left in another man's skull. After the crossing, command rotated crews for rest. Cassidy was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to a training battalion. Vitelli caught pneumonia and was sent to hospital in Luxembourg. Harlan remained, stubborn as his accent. I stayed too, partly out of duty, partly because I didn't know what else to do. When a machine defines your heartbeat, stopping it feels like betrayal. The last weeks were a blur of movement, town surrendering before we arrived, columns of prisoners, the smell of spring layered with ruin. I remember driving through a village where the church bell had melted and solidified mid-fall, fused to the ground like time refusing to continue. In that place, we stopped firing altogether. The war was ending not with victory but with exhaustion. When Germany finally cracked open in May, we were stationed outside Kassel. Cassidy sent me a letter through battalion mail, short, typed, all edges: "They're teaching the reverse fire drill at Fort Knox now. Don't worry. No one knows where it came from. Maybe that's for the best." He was right. The manual I had once underlined at Fort Knox would soon have an appendix, a single paragraph written by some staff officer summarizing what we had proven in fog: under certain environmental conditions, crews may achieve reduced exposure by reversing hull alignment relative to turret orientation. It sounded scientific. It erased everything human about it: the fear, the hesitation, the smell of rain inside steel. But I suppose history prefers tidy sentences over muddy footprints. After discharge, I went home to Iowa. The farm was smaller than I remembered. My father's hands shook too much to fix engines anymore, so I took over quietly. The first tractor I repaired felt like resurrection, the click of wrenches replacing G*fire, the hiss of fuel lines instead of hydraulic recoil. Every time the engine caught, I saw a flicker of flame on armor and forced myself to breathe through it. On the mantel above the fireplace sat an empty shell casing. Harlan had sent it months after we parted, one of the M61 rounds we'd fired that day, polished clean, engraved with 5 words, "The wrong way," but it worked. I kept it there, not as pride but as balance, a reminder that rules are tools until they aren't. Sometimes survival means turning logic inside out and trusting that the world will blink first. Neighbors would visit, talk about the war the way people talk about storms after they've passed, how loud it was, how lucky we were to still have roofs. They asked if I'd done anything special. I always said no. I was just a G*ner who aimed carefully. But some nights, when the fields were quiet and the wind slid through the barn slats just right, I could hear the faint hum of that Continental radial engine, the heartbeat of 30 tons remembering the wrong direction. I would sit on the porch, coffee cooling in my hand, and watch the horizon. Out there, somewhere in the dark, were the ridgelines of France and the silhouettes of tanks facing every possible direction. Maybe some crew, years later, would find themselves cornered in fog, instinct failing, orders useless. Maybe one of them would think to turn the turret backward, not knowing why, not knowing who first tried it, and live because of it. That was enough. No medals, no headlines, just a whisper that moved through machines and men. Sometimes the only way forward is the opposite of what you're told. And in that quiet inheritance, I could finally hear her voice again, my mother, calm and absolute, every problem has an angle. Find it, and you'll fix it. I did, Ma. Just once. And it fixed 4 lives. France, winter again, years later in memory. The forest has grown back, swallowing the road where fire once lived. No wrecks now, only moss, silence, and the ghost geometry of a decision. They asked once how it felt, facing the wrong way. I told them it felt exact. The world narrows to sight picture, wind, breath, trigger. You stop thinking about right and wrong, you think about distance and the way fog bends sound. We fired backward and survived forward. That's all. History prefers orders that make sense. But life, and war, are angles, never straight lines. Somewhere in a manual, my act became a paragraph without my name. Somewhere a young G*ner reads it, thinking it was doctrine. Maybe that's enough. I still dream of that sh*T, the recoil, the silence after. He faced the wrong way. And that's exactly why his crew lived.